let's bring on my next guest, Ida Smith. How are you doing today, Miss Smith?
I am okay. I am cold. I'm in New York, and I am grateful for the opportunity to speak with you. So thank you for that.
No problem.
Appreciate
Thank you
it.
for joining. Thank you for coming on and being a part of the show. So, before we get into the whole conversation I want to have with you, I want you to just briefly introduce yourself to the public who might not be familiar with who you are.
Okay, so I'm Ida Smith. I am a seventh generation Virgin Islander out of St. John. My mother is America Hodge Smith, grandmother Inez Othelia Hodge, Matthias Hodge, and her mother was Evelina Myers Matthias. Three Meyer sisters married three Matthias brothers, so that left us with a great inheritance of land on St. John, Virgin Islands. And we have interest in several properties over in St. John in the Coral Bay area. I, as you know, was born in New York City, and I decided to run for a delegate to Congress after much prayers and after much consultation with family members and with the group, The People's Choice. And we noticed that things were not going according to law in the Virgin Islands, and we didn't want to be known as the people that accepted human trafficking and endangering children, minors, and being a part of Epstein. I noticed one day going to outside, I noticed that the newspapers were filled with Epstein enablers, and it had a picture of our delegate, Stacey Plaskett's face there, as well as others that were in our government. And it was upsetting. It was shocking. It was appalling. It was like, no, we don't agree with that. And if you have a representative, then that person speaks for you. That person is acting on your behalf. So myself and the group, we decided we're going to challenge that and make it known that to the world that the Virgin Islands does not stand for human trafficking, and it especially does not stand for abusing children or trafficking children. So I decided to put my hand, in my hat in the race, and I received the 200 signatures, albeit in Carolyn Fox's complaint in the Superior Court, she said that I nominated myself, and that's not even possible to just nominate yourself and be able to be put on, as a candidate. There's a nomination petition that goes around. So that was one falsehood that was done in that frivolous complaint that was finally kicked out, but it wasn't kicked out until late in November after the election. But it was filed 3 days after early voting. Interesting timing, as is this interview, Anthony, because the complaint against Carolyn Fox was actually filed electronically in November.
Mhm.
However, payment had to be made, and it wasn't allowed to be made. It wasn't allowed to be made electronically. So what we did was express mail the payment to the court. And at the
Mhm.
same time, we also sent a hard copy, because when you file electronically with the court, they send you a notice that within 24 to 48 hours, you will get, hear back from them that they're in receipt of it. We didn't hear back from them, so we wound up sending it express mail. And with the U.S. postal money order for the $405 to get the docket number, we also sent in our request for summonses. Yet we did not receive the summonses, and we were in communication, constant communication with the clerk in the court in Washington, D.C., because that's a federal court, and this is federal violations of law, and it was a federal position that I ran for. And
Mhm.
there were federal violations under the American Disability Act. There were federal violations under the Civil Rights Acts, and there were federal violations under the Voting Rights Acts, just to name a few things. So when people wonder, well, why didn't it go to the District Court of the Virgin Islands? if you know, the District Court of the Virgin Islands is not a federal court. It's not an Article 3 court, and it doesn't deal with things that happen on the federal level per se.
Mhm.
So my journey was real interesting because never on God's green earth did I expect to be told that I don't qualify. I would never apply for a position that I didn't do the research to make sure that I qualified for. Again, if you're a seventh generation Virgin Islander, not that you need to be, but you should qualify to represent the Virgin Islands. But Ms. Fox saw it differently. And I have to say that ignorance is bliss, and we should play this game called Bliss right now, because it appears that people aren't understanding that the Supreme Court of the United States is the highest court in the United States. Would we agree, Anthony?
Yes, it is the highest court.
So if the Supreme Court of the United States has already ruled as to the qualifications for the position for delegate to Congress, U.S. House of Representatives, then why are we changing those qualifications? Why would the Virgin Islands change the qualifications or allow the supervisor of elections to change the qualifications? Is way beyond me. And the Attorney General, although he issued his opinion and it was good, I mean, it was in my favor, he didn't have to do that because the law spoke for itself. And I sent Ms. Fox the documentation, the cases from the Supreme Court that spoke to the qualifications, and residency is not one. Here's another thing that everybody needs to understand, because I see all of the comments going in the Facebook, and it's really sad that we don't understand elected. Elected has a D at the end. And if there's a D at the end, that means after something happens. So it says you have to be an inhabitant once elected. The election didn't happen. My family and I, again, been there since before the United States was a thought. Before. So we're there, so much so that some entities like the National Park Service try to say that most people that were there before they came along are trespassing. Then we have the people that come there from all across the country that want to get surveys done and say that the people that have been there before 1917 are trespassing. Now, I sent you some documentation in regards to the Congress in 1917 asking questions of each other, like, where does the Virgin Islands, now it's called the Virgin Islands, it was called the Danish West Indies. And they asked, did you see the questions that were being asked by the congressmen and the senators? Like, does the Constitution apply to the Virgin Islands? Did you see that?
Mm-hmm. Yes,
That
I
was
saw
the
that.
question even then. And then we have the situation where the treaty was mentioned in that conversation. And then people act like the treaty doesn't exist, but it does. And we have to know that. We don't have to have the formal education of going to college, but we do have to know at least sixth grade education that when one sovereign takes over another sovereign, as the Danish West Indies was owned Denmark and the United States, they entered into a contract, and that contract came with articles. And within those articles, it tells you what Denmark was giving to the United States and what the people that were there were entitled to under God's law first and then man's law. So it's important that people understand that this treaty between Denmark and the United States, it's called Treaty Series number 629. And it was ratified under 39 Stat 1706. And it's in force. That's what makes it in force. So I'm not sure why we're trying to say that the Revised Organic Act is our Constitution or can be our Constitution when an act of Congress couldn't possibly be the Constitution for the people by the people. And I'm not sure why Article 6 of Treaty Series number 629 is being ignored, where it specifically states that Congress does have the right to do certain things as it pertains to the people in the Virgin Islands, but not as it pertains to our civil and political rights. That's where our Constitution and our free will, ironically, that's the name of the school that I met you at, that's where our free will comes into place. And we have to utilize our free will. So I'll pause right there.